Hi there, so good to connect with you again. Welcome to Edbertleadership podcast, where we examine leadership as a practice, not about personalities, titles, or positions, but about actions and activities that people carry out to make progress on the goals, visions, and challenges that matter to them. Leadership being a practice, we can learn from the successes and failures of individuals and what might have been different if the right leadership culture had been embraced. Have you ever found yourself in an organization where everyone sees the warning signs, yet no one dares speak up? Where leaders resist feedback, take things personally, and decisions head towards disaster, unchecked? This week, we dive into a powerful, sobering lesson drawn from a real tragedy that unfolded in 2023. It's a story that exposes how leadership failures rooted in ego, culture, and silence can lead to devastating consequences. In this episode, you will walk away with practical and tested leadership principles drawn from history and real-world experience, because leadership isn't about who you are, but what you do. And so, if you've ever felt the weight of a decision you couldn't challenge, or you watched a leader ignore clear warnings, or you've worked in a culture where the leader is always right, or where the top authority figure or the leader can't differentiate between feedback and criticisms, or where a leader can't differentiate between self and role, or you work in an environment where speaking up is seen as disloyalty or disrespect, or you are in an organization where you fear that a toxic culture might spiral into irreversible damage, then this episode is for you. I recently watched the Netflix documentary on the OceanGate Submersible Disaster. The Titan submersible operated by OceanGate imploded on June 18, 2023, during its descent to the Titanic wreck in the North Atlantic Ocean, resulting in the tragic loss of all 5 people on board, including the company OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush. Now, towards the end of the documentary, the former head of engineering, Nissen, who was fired in 2019 for refusing to approve a Titanic area dive because of safety concerns, made a statement which caught my attention, and I quote, "The real mistake isn't in the idea that something wasn't classed or we didn't follow a set of regulations. That's not really the mistake. Rather, Stockton came to identify himself with OceanGate. He's the guy who does this. He's the guy who breaks through barriers to unlock the oceans to humanity. And if you criticize any aspect of that operation, you are criticizing him personally." And then he went ahead to make this powerful statement, and I quote, "It's culture that caused this to happen. It's culture that killed the people 100%. Immediately I said, this is powerful. I thought about adaptive leadership and organizational culture, the dangers of allowing a wrong culture to eat into a system, and where there is no understanding or differentiation between self and role. The biggest challenges in our families, organizations, or in societies, they are not, like I always say, they are not technical, but they are adaptive. And as we will see in this unfortunate disaster, there were huge technical issues, but what ultimately caused the disaster were adaptive issues. When authority figures conflate self with role, allowing a maladaptive culture to prevail in the organization, it can ultimately be disastrous, whether for a family, or an organization, or a community. The effective practice of leadership necessitates that leaders understand the difference between self and role. Now, what does this mean? I'd like you to stay with me as I consider 6 leadership principles relevant to building a healthy organizational culture, a healthy adaptive culture, and in my opinion, principles that could have prevented the OceanGate disaster. And the first one is An authority figure needs to learn to distinguish between self and role. One of the core tenets of adaptive leadership is the ability to distinguish between self and role. As a leader, you are not your role, but occupy the role to further a cause or achieve certain outcomes. Interestingly, other individuals are attached to your role, hence they have the responsibility or duty to speak up concerning your activities while in that role. It's not impersonal. Some leaders come into a role and by their behaviors make it difficult for members of their team to speak up regarding their actions in the role. It's an anomaly. As a leader, if you don't want to be spoken to or you have a problem listening or considering other perspectives, then probably better not to take the role. In the OceanGate tragedy, Stockton Rush appeared to have deeply fused his identity with the mission of the company, so much that any criticism of the project was perceived as a personal attack. This blurring of boundaries between self and role created an environment where feedback was not welcomed and introspection was stifled. Adaptive leadership calls for a healthy detachment from one's leadership role, allowing for objective decision-making and openness to critique. When a leader sees themselves as the sole embodiment of a mission, the ability to lead adaptively diminishes. Leadership then becomes about defending personal pride rather than advancing the mission or protecting the people involved. By separating self from role, leaders can foster a culture where questioning and diverse opinions are not threats, but necessary elements of growth. It allows the leader to make difficult decisions without being clouded by personal ego or emotional attachment to a specific vision. Ultimately, leaders must remember that they are stewards of their roles, not owners. The mission is larger than any one person. And when ego drives decision-making, it can lead to catastrophic consequences, as seen in the OceanGate disaster. Principle number two, resist the temptation of hero leadership. The OceanGate documentary highlighted Stockton Rush as a pioneering figure who aimed to push the boundaries of deep-sea exploration. Now, while visionary leadership is valuable, the tendency to assume a hero role where the leader is seen as the sole savior or driver of progress can be dangerous. There are no heroes in leadership. Hero leadership places too much responsibility and unchecked power in the hands of one individual. It promotes the concept of leadership for a few and not everyone leading. This is where some leaders place little premium on any counsel that doesn't emanate from them. Stockton was warned by many in his team and several in the ocean marine community, but his desire for ego and fame got in the way. He was quoted as saying, "It's not innovation if you are not breaking some rules, but innovation must be done within the boundaries of industrial accountability, else it becomes reckless." Leadership should be about mobilizing others to tackle tough challenges, not about being the person with all the answers. The hero mentality often leads to isolation, as leaders may begin to see themselves as the only ones capable of making critical decisions. This can prevent valuable insights from emerging within the team. Furthermore, hero leadership fosters dependency among followers, reducing their willingness to speak up or to contribute meaningfully. This stunts the organization's ability to learn and adapt, especially in complex, high-stakes environments. In contrast, adaptive leadership is about distributing responsibility, encouraging collaborative problem solving, and recognizing that no one individual can succeed alone. True leadership lies not in personal glory, but in empowering others. Third principle that I want to highlight. In organizations, they need to maintain a holding environment. Now, what does this mean? A holding environment is a concept from adaptive leadership that refers to the space leaders create for people to deal with difficult issues, including conflict, uncertainty, and loss. In the case of OceanGate, such a space appeared to be lacking. Feedback and concerns were reportedly met with defensiveness. making it difficult for re-dialogue to occur. Creating a holding environment requires intentional effort. Leaders must foster trust, safety, and openness so team members feel encouraged to share their thoughts, even when those thoughts are critical. This environment is essential for adaptive work, which involves tackling problems that don't have easy or known solutions. When leaders take criticism personally or react with hostility, they shut down the very conversations that could surface risk and spark innovation. A holding environment invites people to speak truth to power, enabling the group to confront reality together. Leaders who build such environments are not only better equipped to identify emerging issues, they also cultivate resilience and adaptability within their teams. It becomes possible to navigate uncertainty collaboratively rather than being blindsided by avoidable disasters. And the fourth principle I want to talk about is understanding the systemic nature of failure. The powerful quote in the documentary, "It's culture that caused this to happen," underscores a vital principle. Failure is rarely just technical. Adaptive leadership teaches that most organizational breakdowns stem from deeper systemic issues, often cultural in nature. In OceanGate's case, the culture reportedly dismissed external scrutiny and prized risk-taking over precaution. Recognizing systemic problems means looking beyond surface-level errors to examine underlying values, assumptions, and behavioral norms. Technical fixes, such as new protocols or checklists, are insufficient if the culture itself reinforces unsafe practices or silences dissent. In working with organizations, I'm keen to ask, what's your leadership culture? What are your core values? And by these, I'm not really referring to what most organizations put out in the lobby of their fancy office buildings or on their websites. What I'm keen to know is what culture and values the prevailing behaviors in the organization represent. An organization can have values like transparency and integrity as part of their core values, but in their daily operations and actions, they are very far from transparency and integrity. The behaviors of key authority figures in any organization are a key reflection of the culture and values they uphold. I'm reminded of a story I read in a book some years ago. It's a book by Dean Williams, Leadership for a Fractured World. Interestingly, it had to do with another disaster. In March 2011, an earthquake and tsunami triggered a meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant in Japan. But it wasn't just nature, it was a man-made failure rooted in leadership and culture. What was the cultural issue? Reluctance to question authority. The findings from Japan's parliamentary investigation called it a meltdown made in Japan disaster. The report highlights reflexive obedience as an ingrained tendency not to challenge seniors or the system, resulting in critical information being withheld from top decision makers. An adaptive leader is one who is willing to challenge entrenched beliefs and shift organizational culture, even when it's uncomfortable or slow-moving. They understand that meaningful change requires cultural transformation, not just new tools or technologies. Only by addressing these root causes can leaders prevent similar tragedies. Culture shapes how people make decisions under pressure, how they treat risk, and whether they feel empowered to speak up. Without cultural change, technical solutions remain fragile and superficial. I've got a quick question for you. What are the prevailing culture and values in your organizations? One way to know is to check out the routine behaviors of key figures in the organization. And principle number 5 that I want to talk about is have to learn to monitor the risk of mission-driven blindness. OceanGate's stated mission was to democratize deep sea exploration and make it more accessible. Was bold and inspiring. However, a noble mission can sometimes blind leaders to operational realities. When the mission becomes sacred, decisions that compromise safety may be justified in the name of progress, which can lead to catastrophic consequences. Adaptive leaders must constantly interrogate whether their means still serves the mission or whether the mission has begun to justify reckless decisions. Leaders can become so enamored with the vision that they ignore data that contradicts it or take shortcuts to keep the dream alive. This can be referred to as the shadow side of vision-driven leadership. Blind vision is not leadership. Good leadership requires ongoing alignment between values, methods, and realities. It means slowing down when needed, listening to dissenters, and being willing to change course, even if it delays progress. A mission should inspire courage and innovation, but never arrogance or tunnel vision. OceanGate's strategy teaches us that being mission-driven is not enough. Leaders must guard against what we call narrative intoxication, the belief that because a story feels right or important, it must be followed no matter the cost. Great leaders stay inspired, but also grounded in the practical, human, and ethical limits of the systems they lead. And my sixth and final point and principle is we must foster adaptive capacity in our organizations. One of the biggest failings suggested by OceanGate's internal culture was the inability to adjust based on feedback or changing circumstances. Organizations that lack adaptive capacity cannot evolve. They stagnate under pressure or collapse when their assumptions are proven wrong. In high-stakes operations, this is fatal weakness. Adaptive leadership is about helping organizations build the muscles to learn in real time. This includes setting up feedback loops, debriefing mistakes, empowering people to challenge assumptions, and rewarding experimentation. It also means being nimble enough to shift strategy when conditions change, not months later, but immediately. An adaptive organization values reflection just as much as action. It doesn't just do things quickly. It evaluates whether it's doing the right things in the first place. It's never married to a single way forward. When OceanGate disregarded repeated external and internal concerns, it revealed a system that could not course correct, even in the face of growing danger. Ultimately, fostering adaptive capacity is about creating a culture of resilience and responsiveness. Leaders who build this are not just protecting their organizations, they are safeguarding the people inside them. The inability to adapt in OceanGate's case wasn't just a strategic error, it became a matter of life and death. Really sad. I hope these 6 principles have been useful. They are important for any organization, any family, any society, any community. And I'd like you to share this podcast with someone, subscribe to our channel, Edbertleadership, if you haven't. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. See you later. Thank you.